Welcome back to Mr. DuPage's classroom. This lesson is for my Algebra 2 class. It is solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. The first three problems here are review. Problem number 1, looking at x squared minus 5x plus 6. The easiest way to solve this problem would be to factor. What multiplies to 6 and adds to negative 5? Well, because I have a positive in the back and a negative in the front, both sides will be negative. The front blanks will be x, and the numbers that will multiply to 6, add to 5 would be negative 2, negative 3. From here, I need to set them equal to 0. Add 2. X would be positive 2. Add 3. X would be positive 3. Problem number 2, looking at this, 4x squared minus 25. That is the difference of two squares. We could factor that. Another way we could do this is we could add 25. That would give me 4x squared is equal to positive 25. Take the square root. Oh, I'm sorry, not yet. We have to get the x squared by itself first. So it would be 4x squared is equal to 25. Divide by 4. That would get me x squared is equal to 25 over 4. Now take the square root. X would equal plus or minus 5 over 2. If you did do the difference of two squares or factor that, it would come out to the same answer. All right, on to number 3. I have 2x squared minus x minus 1. Here again, I need to factor, so I need to look at the multiples of 2 and the multiples of 1. What do my signs need to be? Because my sign in the back is negative, one would be positive, one would be negative. So I need to find the combination that would get me a negative 1 in the front. So if I take 1x times 1, that would be 1x. If I take 2x times 1, that would get me 2x. In order to get to negative x, the 2x would need to be negative, meaning this one would need to be negative. Put a 1 in the back, that works with the 2x. Put an x here, that works with the 1. So now I have 2x plus 1 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0. Subtract 1. 2x equals negative 1, negative 1. Divide by 2. X would equal negative 1/2. Add 1. X would equal 1. All right. I am actually going to skip over the deriving the quadratic formula from completing the square. I will do another video possibly up by Monday if you would like to see deriving the quadratic formula from completing the square. I will go through that. But this is the formula that needs to be memorized. It is if we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 and a is not equal to 0, then our formula will be x equals the opposite of b plus or minus, so the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. All right? So that needs to be absolutely memorized. You need to find a way to memorize that. I will have a story for you tomorrow that might help, but for now, that is what needs to be memorized. So in the top, on the back, we can go ahead and we're going to rewrite our formula. So it's the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so let's look at problem number 4. We're going to solve using the quadratic formula. So my a in this situation would be 1, my b would be negative 5, and my c would be 6. The one thing you need to know about the quadratic formula is it will always work, no matter what. This would always work. All right, so into our formula, we're going to start putting our numbers. So first is the opposite of b. The opposite of negative 5 would be positive 5, plus or minus the square root of b, which would be negative 5 squared, minus 4, times a, which is 1, times c, which is 6, all over 2 times a, which is 1. So we'd have 5 plus or minus. What we're going to do from here is we're going to solve underneath our square root. So what is negative 5 squared? That would be 25. What is negative 4 times 1 times 6? That would be negative 24. All over, what is 2 times 1? Well, that's 2. So we can keep moving. So it'd be 5 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 2. Then we go x equals 5. What's the square root of 1? That would be 1. So now I have 5 plus or minus 1 over 2. Just like in our previous unit, anytime I have this plus or minus like I do right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 5, I'm sorry, I want to have x equals. We need to split this up into x equals 5 plus 1 over 2 and x equals 5 minus 1 over 2. Well, 5 plus 1 is 6. 6 over 2 is positive 3. 5 minus 1 is 4. 4 over 2 is positive 2. So if you compare that to the problem on the front side, which is the exact same problem, problem number 1 here, my final answer was x equals 2 and x equals 3. And that's what we got from factoring. Well, using the quadratic formula, I still get x equals 2 and x equals 3. So on to problem number 5. My a would be 1, my b would be negative 2, and my c would be negative 8. This would be x equals, the opposite of b is 2, plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 8 over 2 times 1, because it's 2 times a. All right. So now I want to solve underneath my square root. So it would be 2 plus or minus the square root of 4, because negative 2 squared is 4. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 8 would be positive 32, all over 2 times 1 is 2. So give me 2 plus or minus the square root of 36 over 2. So x equals 2 plus or minus 6 over 2. If you notice here, I start out, I want to simplify underneath my square root first, so I do so in the second line there. Then I go ahead and add those together. It gets me the 36. The square root of 36 will be the plus or minus 6. And now I can split them up. So it would be 2 plus 6 over 2, which would be 8 over 2. So x equals 4. And I have x equals 2 minus 6 over 2, which would be negative 4 over 2, so x equals negative 2. Those two problems I could factor in order to find those, but problems like number 6. The first thing I want to do with number 6 is I got to make sure that it's equal to 0. In this case, it is not equal to 0, it's equal to negative 10. So in order to make it equal to 0, I'll add 10 to both sides. So it would be x squared minus 6x plus 10 is equal to 0. My a value is 1, my b value is negative 6, and my c value is 10. If you tried to factor this, there is nothing that would multiply to 10 and add to negative 6. So we have to use the quadratic formula. We do not have a choice. The opposite of b is 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 10. Okay? All over 2 times 1. Again, I'm going to simplify under the square root. So 6 plus or minus the square root. Negative 6 squared would be 36. Negative 4 times 10 would be negative 40. All over 2. So x would equal 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 over 2. From here, we need to take the square root of negative 4. So x would equal 6 plus or minus 2i over 2. And now we need to split up our numerators. So x equals 6 plus 2i over 2. And x equals 6 minus 2i over 2. This would really be no real solution, but because I do have the imaginary values from the previous unit, I can solve that for 6 plus 2i over 2 and 6 minus 2i over 2. All right, on to problem 7. Again, the first thing I want to check is to make sure it's equal to 0. It is, so I can check my a is 2, my b is 4, my c is negative 7. X would equal the opposite of b is negative 4, plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 7, all over 2 times a. Now I can simplify what I can. So negative 4 plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16. Minus, or negative 4 times 2 times negative 7 will be positive 56. All over 2. I'm sorry, this is 2 times a, which is really 2 times 2 right here. Make sure you fix that. I apologize. Need to fix this, and we need to fix this. So that would actually be 2 times 2, which is 4. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 72 over 4. This would get me negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 9 times the square root of, that's not going to be right either, be the square root of 36 times the square root of 2. So this would be the square root of 36 times the square root of 2 all over 4. So x would equal negative 4 plus or minus 6 root 2 over 4. So x equals negative 4 plus 6 root 2 over 4. And x equals negative 4 minus 6 root 2 over 4. So again, even though I could leave that as negative 4 plus or minus the square, or 6 times the square root of 2 over 4, I wanted to rewrite that like that just so we get into the habit of splitting up our numerator when we're solving. Okay? Why is the quadratic formula helpful for a problem like 6 or 7? Because we can't solve using square roots, factoring, or completing the square. The quicker you figure out how to use our formula, our quadratic formula, the quicker this stuff will start catching on to you, and you will be able to do this fairly quickly. I know it looks like a lot. There's quite a bit of writing, but it's really not that bad, I promise. All right? So the height, h, in feet of an object t seconds after it is launched is given by the formula h equals negative 16t squared plus v at time 0 times t plus h at time 0, with the initial height being h at time 0 and the initial velocity being v at time 0. So machine shoots a ball straight up in the air at an initial velocity of 85 feet per second. What we're going to do here is we're going to write h equals negative 16t squared. We want to rewrite our problem with the actual numbers for initial velocity and initial height. So feet off the ground, okay? So my initial velocity goes in for v0. It says the initial velocity here was 85 feet per second, so it's 85t plus my initial height here would have been 5 feet off the ground, so we'll add 5. So my a value at this point is negative 16, my b value is 85, and my c value would be 5. Okay? So how long does it take for the ball to hit the ground? What I'm going to do then is, depending on what it's asking me to find, so how long does it take the ball to hit the ground? Well, the ground is 0 feet, or 0 feet from the ground, right? If it told me how long does it take to go to 20 feet, I'd put 20 on that side of the equation. But otherwise, I'm just going to rewrite my equation at this point, setting it equal to 0 because it wants to know about the ground. All right? So now I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So the opposite of b would be negative 85 plus or minus the square root of 85 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 5 all over 2 times negative 16. I'm going to simplify what I can. So negative 85 plus or minus the square root. 85 squared would get me 7,225. Negative 4 times negative 16 times 5 would get me positive 320. And that'll be over 2 times negative 16 would be negative 32. I'm going to continue simplifying. So negative 85 plus or minus the square root of 7,545 over negative 32. 2. At this point, I would try to take the square root of 7,545 and see if it comes out to a whole number. It will not in this case. So what we're going to do in order to keep this as perfect an answer as possible is I'm just going to type these things straight through my calculator. So the next step would be to split up my two equations. I'm sorry. It'd be negative 85 plus the square root of 7,545 over negative 32. So I'm going to type that numerator straight into my calculator, hit enter, then divide by negative 32. What I end up with would be t equals negative 0.06. Now, if I put the other part of my equation in, it would be negative 85 minus the square root 7,545 over negative 32. The reason why t goes in, because that's the amount of time once I solve these. Again, I would type my numerator straight into my calculator, hit enter, then divide by negative 32, and t would equal 5.37 seconds. This will be my answer. Because time cannot be negative, this answer will not work. So then I am finished. So remember, when you are going through a story problem, if you have a t that ends up being negative, we do not use that. However, if you have a t that ends up positive, you can end up using that. Remember that the quadratic formula is the opposite of b. It's right up here at the top. The opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. As soon as you get that memorized, these things start getting quite a bit easier. If you do not memorize them, it will stay fairly difficult. All right. Well, thank you very much for watching my video. If you have any questions, please make sure you come in and ask. Otherwise, have a great day.